This chapter is about logistics, the nuts and bolts about how a good goes from being made to being sold. And we might also call it the supply chain. So the key takeaway from the chapter is understanding what the supply chain is. And then understand that in international business, it's going to be a lot more complicated because you're crossing borders, there's greater differences, there may be, um, you know, um, other companies involved, and the logistics of this supply chain are challenging. So it can be helpful to maybe look at a particular product to understand how is it made, and can maybe help us understand why there might be shortages, why there might be too much, why there might be some that went bad. So these N95 respirators, which can help healthcare workers, where are they? Why is there a shortage? Well, it involves some very, very specific raw materials. There's this polypropylene that's made in Pennsylvania. There's this cellulose that comes from a cedar pulp, and it's combined with synthetic materials. And then there's like four layers of it. And then there's like zinc, and then there's some copper. And there's all these very, very delicate fine materials that have to be made in different parts of North America, and then they're brought to South Dakota to be produced, and then they get shipped to other places in North America. So it's not just a matter of 3M deciding, yeah, today I'd like to make more masks, because they're going to have to talk to their different suppliers and make sure that they can get the raw materials, that there are trains, trucks coming with the raw materials, that there are then outward trains going to, say, wholesalers who then distribute it to governments or to stores or to organizations that need, like hospitals. So there's a lot of moving parts, and that's why this can happen. So it's not a matter of deciding, oh, we're having social distancing, let's order more masks this week. The order actually has to have gone in a couple of months previously so that everything can be moving. Now, why is it still so hard to get the PPE? Well, these are also made in other parts of the world. They're made in China. But because China was shut down due to workers being socially isolated, the manufacturing capacity was shut down. So the factories were not producing, or producing small volumes. Also, again, you're dealing with an international supply chain. As China realized that these respirators and masks were useful, they stopped shipping them overseas like they would in a normal everyday business environment. So the supply chain was disrupted because the government was not allowing it to be exported. Then you might see an issue, which is counterfeit products. A new wholesaler comes on the scene and says that they have legitimate N95 masks, but it's fake. They're not using the right parts. It can be hard to verify the quality of the merchandise, and so this global supply chain is very, very complicated. So looking at a case study, and the book also includes a video on Coke, of how something is made, might help you understand this. And I'll include some article links with this video if you want to read more about this specific case. So just understand that there's four components about this, sourcing it, getting the raw materials. And this can be, for Evian water bottles, right? They get the water from Evian in France, but then they need to get plastic for the bottle. They need to get labels. All of that has to come together. If you look at Nestle water, they get some of their fresh water from Ontario, and so they're paying to take that out of Ontario, and then again they have to get the same kind of containers and boxes, and then both those both those brands go through different suppliers. They have to have reliable factories to sort of process the water, bottle it, ship it all together, and then it gets, shipped to a warehouse and it's stored. So you need to store products. You might see like an Amazon fulfillment center and how busy that can be. It's you need a space to hold the product. You'll see car dealers will have big lots because they need to keep extra cars on hand. You can't just have one of something. Uh, Information management. That's understanding where it is. It's like, where's the order? Has it been shipped yet? You get these emails when you order online shopping. So imagine done thousands and thousands for a big business that is, making millions of a product. They'd have all these different, information pieces floating around, and it's important to know where things are. And then lastly, the physical distribution. Are we getting it from the warehouse to the store? How is it getting to the consumer? And so you might find in international business that these are separate companies. There is a supplier for in the sourcing stage. There is a wholesaler who warehouses it, and then there's a retailer who sells it to you. That these are all separate people. Or you might find that it's all combined, that one company decides to take ownership of all the stages. And that's called a vertical supply chain, where, say, Nike is going to own the factories, it's going to own the warehouses, it's going to own the stores you get it from. That's a very vertical supply chain. Whereas if we were talking about maybe a fast fashion company, it's like the fabric is made somewhere, it gets sewn somewhere, it gets shipped to a warehouse that holds clothing of all brands, and then it gets shipped to the store where you buy it from. And at every stage, it changes ownership. And one reason that companies are trying to do a vertical supply chain is it smooths out the logistics. Some other terms that we talk about, well, that are trends. Containerization. If you've seen one of those big super tankers, you see them on a rail car, those standard shipping containers, that saves time and money because you can easily tack on an extra container to a transatlantic ship. You don't have to unpack it to put it on the train. It's one standard shipping container. You can exchange each other's shipping containers, and you don't have to worry about your custom shipping containers going to one country and then you have to wait for them to get back. You can always use a standard. So ISO, International Standard Organization, that's part of globalization, is having the same sizes and dimensions in all parts of the world, and that's containerization, has made things cheaper and faster to ship. The book also talks about channels of distribution, that you might see a zero-step channel of distribution where it goes directly from the manufacturer to the consumer. You might see a chain that involves some kind of a middleman, a wholesaler who buys it in large quantities and then brings it overseas, brings it into Canada and distributes it to the stores that want it. Or you might see an indirect chain that has wholesalers and retailers and other middlemen to it. So understand, not everyone is going to distribute their product in the same way. It also talks about costing. How it's important to calculate an accurate landed cost. That's what it costs to produce, what it costs to ship, what it costs for insurance, what it costs for tariffs, what any exchange rates, the whole thing from when it's produced, secured, shipped, and finally distributed. All those other little numbers go into the landed cost. So when making a decision to produce globally, your costing has to be accurate because you need to be able to sell it at a price that is profitable. I recommend you watch the video on Toyota just-in-time production system. That's one of their edges. And when they came to prominence in the 60s and 70s, it was because they were very, very precise with their production. They had that information stage, cars are going to need wheels, they need windshields, they need engines, they need seats, they need mirrors, they need all the different components. But you don't want a huge warehouse full of engines just in case they're needed. You know how many cars are going to be made that week, so ideally, having engines arriving at the start of each day or at the start of the week will reduce the amount of storage that's needed, and it reduces costs. There's in terms of food, when there's just in time, there nothing goes bad, there's less shrinkage, there's less waste. And but you need the information management, right? Because it can't get lost or be delayed. Otherwise, the flow of production gets stopped. And so Toyota really revolutionized their production methods to be more efficient. They revolutionized their information system. They called it Kanban, to make sure they knew exactly where each of the car parts were and where everything was in the supply chain. And that, along with automation and sort of their Kaizen system of everyone's responsible to ensure a high quality, cheap, and efficient product, helped them succeed and take a big share of the North American auto market. And you should watch that video that is attached to the course content.